Niagara, home to one of Earth's largest waterfalls. A world-renowned wine region, unique geography, and odd climate is a mysterious place with more politicians than citizens. Within its 13 municipalities, there are some 430,000 wild Niagarans. Maybe, by getting to know them, we can get to know Niagara a little bit better. Each episode, we'll talk to a Niagaran about local issues, opportunities, and politics. This is The Niagarans with Greg Miller.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Niagarans with Greg Miller. I'm your titular host. My guest this week is Niagaran Marty Mako, public health promoter, runner extraordinaire, and the nicest man in Niagara. We're going to get to know Marty better and talk about health in Niagara, volunteerism, and some of Marty's other interests. So, Marty, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Greg.
Now, I remember you coming to speak to the Rotary Club that I was a part of at the time, and you talked a bit about how you got involved in your community while you were still at a young age. So can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Definitely. Born and raised in St. Catharines. I've lived all over the city, actually. I was born in the downtown area. I grew up in Meriton, so M-Town represent. And now I live in Port Dalhousie, and I've lived in Port for the past 12 years or so.
Wow. Okay. And when you were young, did you win a Volunteer of the Year or Teen Volunteer or some sort of recognition?
In high school, it was actually my first connection to the Rotary Club. They offer something, I'm not sure if they still offer it, called the Rotary Medalist.
Right.
And the Rotary Medalist is someone from the graduating class who best balances academics with athletics and community involvement.
Okay. So what were you doing at that time as the community involvement?
I was very involved with high school clubs. I think that's probably the best connection to the community when you're in high school. So social clubs, environmental clubs, volunteering in the community was something that I was really interested in. So my parents were both school teachers, so I think that was part of my inspiration to be involved, not just academically in my school life.
Right. And now you do, to this day, a lot of volunteer work. Quick look at your Twitter or Facebook page will show anyone that. So I know you're in United Way, you're a big brother, you do work with the Humane Society, Out of the Cold, St. Catharines Heritage Committee. So it always seems like you're up to something. So I believe even on your honeymoon you did Habitat for Humanity, if that is correct. And so can you talk a little bit about what motivates you to give up, so much of your time, and how do you choose the causes that you end up volunteering for now?
Yeah, I think people ask me often how you got started or what was that first step. And I think I do have to give credit to my parents for being great role models. I think when I was growing up, my parents were very involved in their respective communities. My dad and mom both being teachers. My dad was very involved in the school as a leader for various school clubs. And for my mom, the passion was animals. So I remember growing up, she was a foster parent for little dogs and cats often. So I remember coming home from school many times and the first words out of my mom's mouth being, "Don't go in the spare bedroom." And I knew it meant there was another foster cat probably that was going to be living with us for a week or two. So back then, I don't think my parents called it volunteer work though. Mm-hmm. I think it was more leading by example.
Right.
Where just their actions were something that maybe didn't have an impact on me at the moment, but it was sinking in.
Right.
And it was seeing that example that maybe led to some of the decisions I made when I was a little bit older.
Right, and that's probably pretty great motivation that it's like ingrained in you that this is what you do. You give back to the community.
Correct. Very positive brainwashing.
Yeah, exactly. So just a couple of the things that you do. I believe are you still on the Gen Next panel for United Way? So that is not the JCs, and it's not the Next Niagara panel. So what's the Gen Next panel, and where does it fit into that kind of emerging generation landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question because it sounds very similar to those other initiatives. United Way recognized about 6 years ago that a number of their donors and volunteers were aging. So if you go to any of their awards dinners or kickoff breakfasts, something you'll notice is the white hair and the balding heads in the crowd. And that's something we recognize our leaders who've been leading this community for a very, very long time, that there has to be eventually some sort of succession planning and thinking about the future. So United Way was proactive in realizing this. So they reached out to me actually to be the first ever chair of a Gen Next cabinet, which was similar to a board of directors, but a young cabinet of young professionals and emerging leaders who are passionate about United Way and support giving back to the local community, but bring that fresh new perspective. So Gen Next cabinets had existed in some larger cities in Canada. Okay. So Toronto, Ottawa, Calgary had them for quite a few years, but we'd never had one in Niagara. So United Way, in its scanning of other agencies similar to them, saw this as an opportunity to engage young professionals in Niagara who are passionate about United Way to form a Gen X cabinet.
And when was that?
And that was started in late 2010.
Oh, okay. And something you kind of touched on a little bit there that I'm kind of interested in is sort of the state of, volunteers and volunteerism in Niagara, because Niagara has a very high nonprofit per capita ratio. Certainly in Ontario, and I think even in Canada, it's one of the highest number of nonprofits for people living here. And as you said, we also have an aging population. And to me, and maybe this is being a bit cynical, but when I look at it, I see a lot of the same people volunteer for a lot of different organizations. I mean, is that something you've noticed, or where do you think we're at? And you said the United Way noticed this problem, and hopefully it's making a change with the Gen Next panel.
Well, one observation I've had since being involved with Gen Next over the past 5 or 6 years is that young people still do want to give back and still do want to make their community a better place. So I guess I would challenge that stereotype that young people are apathetic and are just sitting in their basement playing video games. I do believe they want to get involved. What I think, though, is that the state of volunteerism has changed, and sort of the ways they want to give back has changed. I think in our parents' and grandparents' generation, it was more about joining service clubs. So it was more about longitudinal volunteering, where you would join a service club like Rotary, Kiwanis, the Optimists, the Lions, the Legions, and all of those types of clubs, Knights of Columbus, that are doing and have done great work for probably 80 or 100 years. But it involves attending a weekly meeting or some sort of weekly meal and sort of that commitment. And what I'm seeing with this next generation is not that same interest in joining a long-term cause. It's more episodic in nature. Right. So similar to almost the social media world where you can mobilize very quickly but then disassemble very quickly, I'm seeing that same trend in volunteerism with the younger generation, that they're really great at mobilizing quickly around a tangible cause, making a difference, then they disassemble again.
Right. So it's sort of go in, raise the money or do the volunteer work, whatever it is, move on.
Correct.
Yeah, it's not this. Okay, so that's interesting. That'll be an interesting trend to sort of keep an eye on, because as we say, it is sort of an aging population. And I think, as you said, I do believe that people in younger generations do want to get involved, and we're kind of in this generational sort of adjustment period, I guess.
And one thing I've seen with Gen X that's worked quite well is giving the members the freedom to design the tasks and approaches that how they want to give back. So credit to United Way for not being very prescriptive and top down and saying, we'll let you form a cabinet, but it has to look like this and your objectives have to be this and this is how you have to do it. They've given us a lot of freedom to say, work on whatever you're passionate about.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely great. Definitely that grassroots. Again, I think that's something that this generation, that the emerging generations are interested in. So another one of the places you volunteer is for the St. Catharines, the Heritage Advisory Committee, which I guess came under some fire recently at a council meeting. But what does that committee do? And I know that we have some heritage designated properties in St. Catharines, but not a lot. So what is that committee's role in heritage?
There's two heritage committees for the city of St. Catharines. I think a lot of people have been confused about that. This split happened with the most recent term of council when they reorganized all of their city advisory committees. And so with the reorganization, they created one called the Heritage Permit Committee, whose focus is specifically on heritage permits. And then the committee I joined, which is called the Heritage Advisory Committee. And the advisory committee has more of a promotional role in the community, raising awareness of heritage properties. A few of the initiatives we do include creating framed histories for a number of buildings right here on St. Paul Street that may have heritage associations. And the owner would love to have a framed history right in the front foyer there, so when people walk in to the building, it's something to start a conversation about. And we also do public outreach. So we do a display in the downtown library each year on a different heritage-related theme. We've attended other community events, and it's really just trying to raise awareness of the great history that we have here in the city of St. Catharines.
Right, yeah, that certainly sounds like a very very relevant work that you're doing there. And, I think that there was a time in St. Catharines where we didn't maybe appreciate the heritage building. So how many buildings are we at that have heritage status in St. Catharines right now?
In terms of heritage status, there are designated and undesignated properties. Okay. And there's also interior of buildings can be designated and exterior of buildings can be designated. So I'm not sure the exact number of heritage designated buildings, but what we have a much larger number of are undesignated buildings, and that's into the hundreds.
So is that like a recognition that they have heritage value?
But the research has to be done to talk about what is it about those buildings that give it heritage value. And the challenge with getting that done is that we're a committee of volunteers.
Right.
So the city staff don't have the capacity to do that on their work time. Yeah. And we have a few people on the committee who are amazing researchers, but they're limited by this just being something they do in the evenings.
Yeah, it's volunteer.
So we're knocking them off one building at a time, but it'll take quite a while to get all those hundreds of buildings designated. But part of the reason we want to do that is to try and get ahead of the curve of some of these controversies that happened at City Council over the past few years, where it's when a building's under threat of demolition, then it comes in the spotlight.
Right, and that's what we saw at the Port Pavilion very recently, a week or so ago. And I got to think that committee, it's got to be a little bit difficult because St. Catharines is an area to some extent that's a bit penned in. So there's a lot of motivation or desire to grow, and we really can only grow up or by demolishing old buildings. So that's got to be a tough role to balance that sort of planning and growth with protecting our heritage and our history.
Definitely. So one of our roles too is trying to get people to better understand the value of heritage buildings, because some people see them as a hindrance to growth.
Right.
Whereas there's a lot of research out there that shows that heritage values economically make sense for a city, both in terms of the value as a homeowner or as a tourism draw. A number of cities, if you visit around Europe, they see their history and their heritage as one of their prime draws.
Right.
But for whatever reason, here we don't seem to see heritage in that same light.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think just a quick walk around downtown and still having some of those old buildings really does add value aesthetically and economically. So now when you're not volunteering or getting married or working out or running, and it's hard to believe that time exists, but you do have a day job as a public health promoter for the Niagara region. So I know that healthcare is a provincial mandate. So what's the region's role as a municipality in regard to health?
It's a very good question, because I think a lot of people confuse health promotion and health care, and they mix up where I work, which is Niagara Region Public Health, and the Niagara Health System. I think an easy way to think about it is the Niagara Health System exists when you need treatment. So when people are already sick or injured or ill, that's when you would generally access the health care system. In the public health system, we're often more behind the scenes because we're trying to keep people well in the first place. So public health involves promotion, prevention, and protection.
Okay.
So the area I work in is chronic disease and injury prevention, and in particular, I'm a health promoter. But we also have positions like health inspectors who inspect all the restaurants, the beaches, the waterways. So that's the protection function. And then we also have nurses who give vaccines and also try to prevent diseases in that way. So that falls under more the infectious disease prevention and vaccine prevention. And then in my division, which is chronic disease prevention, we're focusing on more long-term illness.
So what is the status of health in Niagara? I know that, St. Catharines has been called the donut capital, and Niagara's historically had problems with things like obesity rates and alcohol consumption and some other indicators of health. And the Living in Niagara 2014 report said health in Niagara is getting better, but there's still a way to go. So, what do you see, within your role in public health as sort of the status of health?
Yeah, I think one of the big acknowledgments over the past few years has been the impact of the social determinants of health on health status. For many, many years, we focused more on healthy lifestyles. So when we were talking about percent of people who are active, or percent of people who eat 5 to 10 fruits and vegetables a day, or percent of people who smoke. And we're still interested in those sort of indicators, but I think what we're seeing a lot more as we drill down down is health inequities beneath the surface, and that would be residents who are struggling financially on lower incomes, maybe residents who don't have stable and secure housing or access to education. They are suffering much larger burdens due to all of those indicators. So simply by handing out more brochures and pamphlets and information isn't going to lead to the behavior change we want.
Right. It's not just an awareness issue or something that people don't know about, how they can improve their health.
If only it were that easy.
Right. There's serious restrictions. And, when I look at it, I've seen in an area like public transit, there's been a lot more talk now about how taking public transit affects someone's health in terms of it being an active mode of transportation. And, we're seeing that health enter a lot of conversations that maybe it didn't even, a decade ago. So you've been a public health promoter for about 10, I think just over 10 years now. So what have you seen change sort of within, that preventive and sort of social role of health?
To kind of build off what you just said, I think our new role is a lot more about partnerships and collaborations with other sectors that maybe we wouldn't have worked with in the past. I think traditionally, though, government is organized by silos. So you have the Ministry of Health, who funds health activities. And in the past, a lot of our activities were done by health professionals. But now we're seeing how our communities are designed has a huge impact on health, whether we have bike lanes or whether we have sidewalks in communities and the density of communities versus urban sprawl. So that has led us to work a lot more with urban planners. In the past, we would never have worked with urban planners, but now we're working with them much more in the past. Another example would be public transit. When you start talking about the health impacts of transit, maybe 10 years ago, people wouldn't have seen the relevancy or the connection, but now we see a definite connection because that involves active transportation and people who are not having to become as reliant on cars as they were maybe a generation ago. So working with different disciplines, even like public works, because they're often the ones who design the roads. So, working with them, and community services too, because if you're talking about poverty and residents who are living on Ontario Works or Ontario Disability, they're the ones who are involved with that relationship with clients. So I think it's a lot more of tearing down walls and silos that have traditionally existed in government and having to reach out and work with other stakeholders in the community, because health generally becomes a shared responsibility. It might be in my job title, but I think it's more of a shared responsibility.
Right, and so it's not necessarily that the role of public health as a department is growing. It's sort of that you're working with maybe people and sectors that you didn't work with before, and building those partnerships. So what would you like to see? Maybe not necessarily change, but where do you see that sort of that going? Like, where do you see public health in 5 years or 6 years?
I would like to see even more of an intentional emphasis on addressing health equity. I think unless we start taking that really seriously and addressing those underlying root determinants of health. So whether it's income, education, employment, housing, transportation, even social inclusion, because social isolation and people living alone is a determinant of health, and we have a lot of that happening in Niagara. So I think it's getting a better handle on those issues and what do solutions look like, that it might be a much more comprehensive partner-focused solution.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of the things, and we've talked about some of them on past episodes, people are starting to realize, I think, that a lot of the issues that we confront, and it's not a Niagara-specific issue, but the issues that Niagara confronts are systemic issues that require, maybe more nuanced and complex ideas, but people don't really want that. People want the magic bullet. People want to flick the switch and have everything be better. What kind of, initiatives and specific things do you think, or is public health doing now and will be doing sort of in the coming years? Another thing I think we need to do better, we've just started doing this a little bit better, is community engagement and involving the community in these solutions, because to your point, they're very long term and can be perceived as slow. The magic bullet is not out there. It does not exist. It's taken many, many years for us to be in the state that we are now, and it's going to take many, many years to get out of it. And I think the only way to make those solutions long term and sustainable is with community involvement. So doing a lot more community engagement during the planning phase of projects, so you're not delivering a new program or service
to someone, you're doing it with them.
Right.
So it's involving the community and putting the public back in public health.
Right.
So they feel more shared ownership. So our role is more of a facilitator or navigator or guide rather than just a professional that's here to give you a brochure.
Right. Here are the rules, and if you follow them, you'll be okay.
It's much more two-way and engagement focused.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's great to hear. So, on this show, we can't really go too far without talking about politics. So, you're a very community-minded person, obviously, and in 2010, you ran for St. Catharines City Council, I believe in Port Dalhousie. So, what was that experience like for you?
I was very new to the political scene at that time. I think my motivation was just my past community involvement, that I loved being a volunteer and being involved in my community in a number of different ways. So this seemed sort of like a natural next step, that taking on more of a formal leadership role in the community was my motivation to be involved. I think the thing I take away from that I probably loved the most was getting to meet all of my neighbors. I think another part of today's society is you don't meet your neighbors enough and really get to know them and get to know what are the things they like about their neighborhood, what are the things they think could be done better. And when you're running for council, at least my approach was just to canvass and actually spend every night after work for a few months just knocking on doors with a notepad and a pen and a paper and just write down what do you like about your community and what do you don't.
Right. And do you find people are still, receptive to that sort of knock on doors, face-to-face sort of conversation?
I do. I believe that social media helps, but it's not a replacement for that. I don't think anything replaces actually taking the time to knock on the door and just talk to your neighbor.
Now, so that was in 2010. You didn't run in 2014, which was the last municipal election. Would you consider doing so in the future? Just, saying that because I think that if people take a broad look at the political I don't want to say circus, but the political landscape, let's say in Niagara, I think a lot of people would look at someone like you who's very community-minded and think you're the kind of person they'd like to see. So is it something you see happening in your future you're leaving a door open to, or...
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll be running it again at some point. I guess I don't see politics as a career. Okay. So it's not something that I would like to do for 20 or 30 years continuously. I think it's something I would like to do for a short term and then let someone else have a chance.
Right.
So whether it's this term, whether it's in 2 or 3 terms, I have no desire to be a 5 or 10 term counselor. Right. I think doing it for 2 or 3 terms, letting my ideas get out there and letting me help shape the moment that I'm in and then pass the torch. I think it's important for the next generation to always feel like they have a voice. Yeah. So when it's my turn, it'll be my turn, and when it's my turn to move on, I'll go back and doing the other jobs that I love in my community.
Right, and I think that's interesting what you said. It's like a natural, next step in a way that you've volunteered and you work in the public sector and you've done a lot of the things in the community. Now it's sort of like the next stage. So we'll definitely be keeping our eye on the ballots for Marty Mako.
Well, it's a huge honor. I think representing your city, whether it's councilor or mayor in a more formal way, is an amazing honor, but it's nothing I would think of as a career.
Right, yeah, no, and I wish more people thought like that. So getting towards the end of the show here, so what the last question we like to call the burning question on the Niagarans. So, and I think Matt Harris, who was our last guest, kind of alluded to this, and I mentioned in the intro that you are just about the nicest person in the world. I don't think I've seen you get upset, and you use social media a lot, and most people use social media, in my experience, to be angry, and you manage to use it to be almost 100% happy all the time. So do you get mad about things, and what? What is the thing that finally gets Marty Mako's goat?
Oh, that's funny. And I'm sure I do get angry at some times. Maybe I'm just very selective before I hit send on the Twitter feed, because then it can't be taken back. But I'd say maybe I'm pretty hard on myself when I set a lot of goals. I think I'm a pretty goal-oriented person. I don't really have a snooze button on my alarm, so when it's time to get up for the day, I get going. And, when I don't meet my own goals, I tend to get more angry at myself than anyone else. I think you should always lead by example. So, maybe I try to control my temper when it's with my friends and family and colleagues. But, I can be hard on myself if I set a goal and don't make it. But I always try to think, it's always move forward. So you try not to stay angry too long.
Yeah, you should maybe think about patenting some sort of system that keeps you from hitting that send button, because I think there's probably a lot of people who could use it. Because certainly I think that when I go to Twitter and I'm going through my newsfeed and I see something from Marty Mako, it's almost always something uplifting, or it's the quote of the day or the inspiration. So if you could somehow share that with everyone.
Well, I think social media is a tool, and you can choose to use it for positive or negative. And maybe I feel I'm just counterbalancing most of what's already out there.
You're certainly doing your best to do that. I'm not sure you'll ever be able to do it by yourself, but you're doing a great job. So that's all the time we have for episode 9 of the Niagarans with Greg Miller. So I just want to thank my guest, Marty Mako, for taking the time out of his busy schedule to join us. So if you want, you can find Marty on Twitter at Marty_Mako. Is that the best way to get in touch with you? Do you think? Okay. Drop him a line there, or check out his very, very positive and uplifting feed that he has. So join me next week for episode 10, which I was hoping was going to be a very special episode of the Niagarans. That's our 10th episode, and we're going to do cheesy clips, and Trevor and I here would dish about our past guests. But Trevor shot that idea down. So instead, even better, we'll have a guest. My guest will be Rhonda Barron of Bridges Community Health in Fort Erie and the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, talking about some of her interests in work in the community. So, as always, if you have any comments or questions, please send them to me on Twitter at NiagaraNext. Ta-ta.
Thanks for listening to The Niagarans with Greg Miller. The show was recorded at the Pop-Up Podcast Studio at Co-Work Niagara, home of Niagara's independent workforce. Production by Trevor Twining. Intro music provided with permission by Windfall Found. If you have an idea for an interview for The Niagarans, please reach out on Twitter to Niagara Next. This podcast is part of the Niagara Podcast Network. We love independent media, and we're working together to make it more available to folks in the Niagara region. If you have an idea for a podcast or would like to support one, please connect with us at niagarapodcasters.org.